Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and today I want to talk to you guys about a highly requested topic, basically around the idea of not tier 2ing a character. And you're not tier 2ing the character because they're bad. You're just holding off or waiting to tier 2 them much later because they don't get as much out of their tier 2 as another character might in fact get. So for this list, obviously we can't have native tier 2 characters like Doctor Strange, Wolverine. Obviously all of those will be skipped. We're obviously also going to skip our fan favorite Sharon Rogers. Sharon Rogers actually does fit the bill for this type of question very often, although we do recommend that all new players start off with Sharon Rogers and then eventually tier 2 her because she's just one of the best characters in the game. If you wanted to go a different route and if you wanted to use different characters, there isn't a lot of extra gain that Sharon Rogers gets from her tier 2. Absolutely, she becomes even more of a monster, but she already has the prototype in her stats and in her skills to be an amazing character at tier 1, which is essentially what this is about. So the two things that we're going to be focusing on are the tier 2 passive and how for some of these characters, their tier 2 passive is just not strong enough to warrant a very fast or urgent tier 2. And then also the fact that at tier 1, because their skills are so strong, it doesn't necessitate getting them to tier 2 because it's not going to change any of their skills. So if there's no skill changes from tier 1 to tier 2, if they have extremely strong skills, and if their tier 2 passive isn't necessarily amazing, if it doesn't really change the character, if it doesn't add tons of damage and a heal and guaranteed dodge the way that Ironheart's does, then you may want to consider not tier 2ing them very soon. So the first character I want to talk about is Black Panther. Black Panther is probably often talked about or mentioned immediately when this question comes up, and it's because he already has all of the skills that he needs to get the job done, and his real weakness is damage. He doesn't deal a lot of damage, he doesn't have a lot of AoE, and his tier 2 passive, although it does address that a little bit, it doesn't address it enough for you to see a huge drastic difference between his tier 1 clear speed and his tier 2 clear speed. If we take a look at his tier 2 passive, it's mostly defensive. It decreases damage received, increases all speed. There's a small bump to his damage, but he already has a damage buff on his 5th skill, which also gives him immunity, and he also has iframes and stuns and bleeds on the rest of his skills, which deal respectable damage, nothing to write home about, but it really doesn't help out his tier 2 enough from his skills to warrant that, and you will still see a lot of value in the character at tier 1, especially for something like Shadowland. He can even do Extreme Alliance Battle and things like that, so he's probably best left at tier 1 until you've built up some of the other required characters, especially in the combat hero class, and then you can come back to him later on. Unless, of course, he's your favorite character, then yeah, sure, you can go ahead and tier 2 him as soon as possible. The next character I want to talk about is Crystal. Crystal is a very, very good character, and while her tier 2 passive is a little bit better, it's a little bit more damage oriented and crowd control oriented, which does suit her kit. She also suffers from the same thing that Black Panther suffers from, where she has a very strong skill set. Her kit from 1 to 5 is very strong, and her tier 2 just doesn't amplify that enough to be a huge bonus or a huge incentive to tier 2 her very quickly. She has a uniform, so you can augment her damage that way, and you can see a big bump in her DPS just by getting her uniform to mythic, getting the attack stats on the 2nd and 5th uniforms that correspond to her uniform, getting those ranked up as well. Things like, well, I haven't done it yet, so you have to check out the list, but you know what I mean. Anyways, she also has, a guard on her 5th skill, so she has defensive things to protect herself. She also has the iframe, I believe, on the 3rd skill, which also has the crowd control. So she already has a lot of usefulness, and again, she's mostly used for Shadowland, where she does dominate there, and she can do so well into the 20s in terms of floor clears at tier 1. So there's not a huge reason to tier 2 her unless, of course, you really love Inhumans that much. The next one I want to talk about is another female character, and it's Sif. Now, Sif is less arguable to be on this list. Some characters are more staples of this list, the don't tier 2 list, and some characters are kind of wishy-washy or on the fence. I think Sif would be more on the fence because although she does have a pretty strong kit, she does get quite a bit out of her tier 2 passive. It improves warrior defense, which is her 4-star passive, which gives her a guard hit, kind of like Shang-Chi, kind of like Miguel O'Hara, just not as good because it's only a 30% chance. But it also does give her 30% guaranteed dodge and 30% guaranteed crit. So that's going to help out both her survivability and her defense, which she needs both of. However, you can still squeeze out quite a bit out of this red-orange based solely on the fact that she has an immunity plus a damage bump on a skill that has a very short cooldown, so 2 seconds with a 5-second cooldown makes it very usable. She has an iframe with the stun. She's got a 5th skill that's got pretty decent AoE and decent length to pierce through and hit lots of enemies. So she's a pretty fun character to use. She doesn't shine in any game mode particularly, so if you really like her, you can get her to tier 2 and use her for world bosses, absolutely. She will struggle, but she can do some world bosses at tier 1, and she can also do some Shadowland stages, especially the female relays. So she does have her niche, but just there are a lot of other combat characters and a lot of other female characters to prioritize tier 2 before her, which is why she finds herself on this list. The next one is probably one of the more controversial ones, but I did want to pursue it, and it's Beast. Now, I say don't tier 2 Beast because you will have a lack of Mcron shards and crystals and that kind of material that you need for Beast and the other X-Men because you'll be busy tier 2ing the other X-Men. While the other 5 X-Men native tier 1 are needed to be tier 2 in order to get Jean Grey, as we all know, Beast is not one of those characters. In addition, Beast doesn't see a lot of increase from his tier 2 passive. 8% guaranteed crit is negligible, 10% recovery rate is basically undetectable, and then the damage received decreased by 15% is nice, but Beast already has a pretty awesome 5th skill that gives him 70% all defense, 30% ignore defense, so he gets a lot of skill bump from that, or stat bump I guess. And then he also has 2 iframes. He has one on his 4th skill, and I believe he has one on his 3rd skill as well, or his 2nd skill. So he already has ways of defending himself. He also now has a uniform which allows you to bump up his stats and his damage output without tier 2ing him, if that's something that you're saving for a later time or for another character. He does also get an increase to his leadership based on his uniform, so again, doesn't require his tier 2 passive. And while he does become tankier, I didn't see a huge jump in his damage, and he doesn't really service one game mode particularly well or at the top, except for maybe Shadowland stages. So it really doesn't require his tier 2 passive for that. All it's going to do is make you clear it a little bit faster. The next character on this list is Agent Venom, and again, he's kind of in the realm of Beast, where you could argue that I'm a bit wrong about this one, but especially as far as paywall characters go, I know it's extremely difficult to tier 2 them if you're a very low VIP, if you can't afford many BOW subscriptions. So I would forward the idea that if you only have a few options to choose from as far as tier 2ing your paywall characters, then you may consider leaving Agent Venom until the end. He does have a pretty strong tier 2 passive because it gives him guaranteed crit, guaranteed or crit damage, and it also gives him a heal on his 4th skill, Venom Frenzy, which is nice. But he already has a lot of damage and he already has a lot of utility on his base skills to do amazingly. His 5th skill has insane AoE, it's got a stun, it's got invincibility. His 4th skill has a great iframe, his 3rd skill has a guard hit, so he's already got all of the tools that he needs at tier 1. The only reason I would say, or I would think to tier 2 him, is if you need that extra damage and you need the level differences for something like Extreme Alliance Battle, because in Extreme Alliance Battle your characters at tier 1 are going to take a hit in terms of their damage and in terms of their ability to hit. They're going to be dodged a lot more often because they're at a lower level than the enemies who are above 60. So if you need him to be above 60 by tier 2ing him, that would be a reason why. Otherwise, I think he's more than serviceable at tier 1, especially if you're just using him for something like Shadowland. The next character is another one that I already tier 2'd, but it's Mantis. And Mantis, more so than Beast and Ancient Venom, doesn't have a very strong tier 2 passive. Yes, this applies to all teammates, but 20% crit damage is okay. 15% ignore defense is really only good if you're a new player. And if you're a new player, one of your first few tier 2s shouldn't be Mantis anyway. So once you get to the point where you don't need a lot of ignore defense, or if you don't want to rely on having Mantis on every one of your teams because it won't work out for certain Shadowland stages, it won't work out for Extreme Alliance Battle, it basically only helps you for World Boss. Her tier 2 passive starts to seem pretty lackluster. And in addition, she already has the weapons that she needs on her skill set at tier 1. She already has the healing, which doesn't get amplified by her tier 2 passive, and she already has the insane crowd control with the fear effects on her 5th skill, and all of the iframes on 4 and 2, and a little bit on 1. So she already has all of those weapons, and she already does them well. Again, the only difference between her tier 1 and her tier 2, in my opinion, is the damage output. She gets a bit of a bump from her tier 2 ascension or advancement, so that does help out her energy attack, that does help out her damage. Her damage is still not impressive, so if you're really struggling and you want to see her output more, then yeah, tier 2ing her is an option. But if it's not about the numbers and if it's not about the time that it takes to clear it, if you just need to be more patient, then you can save your tier 2 ticket or save your tier 2 materials. The next one on the list is Sandman, and I know a lot of people in the free-to-play corner are going to yell that they need Sandman at tier 2 to replace Carnage because they don't have Carnage, and I agree. However, if you don't need to do that, if you have Carnage or if you just don't care about Extreme Alliance Battle, Sandman is perfectly serviceable at tier 1. He's already an extremely strong tier 1 character, and although his tier 2 passive does give him some damage, I believe that it's more defensive in regards to the decrease in all damage received, in regards to the stat bumps to HP and all defense, and he already deals extremely respectable damage at tier 1. I was surprised that he was able to clear Shadowland waves especially faster than some of my tier 2 characters. He's got very good AoE on his skills. He's got a very smooth skill rotation where you can double down on certain skills that have iframes like Sand Scrape, and just overall he's a very strong character. His kit is very strong. He's got a bit of a heal when he gets hit, although it's very hard to use. He's got self buffs that improve his damage and his defense. So overall, I think if you invest in Sandman, you'll be very, very happy, and you don't necessarily need to tier 2 him to see his value come through. It's definitely there as soon as he gets to 6 stars, he gets to level 60, and you give him some decent ISOs and things like that. The next character is another combat type, and it's one of the newer ones, Titania. Titania, much like Sandman, already has so many good qualities at tier 1 with her skills that she doesn't really need to be tier 2. She's fantastic for Shadowland because she's a villain and because she can deal a lot of AoE damage from her skills, and she can deal with waves and things like that. She's got the Sharon Rogers immunity on her 3rd skill, although it buffs her for less. She's got a great iframe on her 5th skill with huge AoE. She's got self buffs. She basically doesn't get a lot from her tier 2 except that she gets a heal, but the heal only triggers when she gets hit, and it's got a cooldown time of 20 seconds. So that's a pretty bad setup overall. To wait for a 15% heal every 20 seconds is really not going to help you that much. If you're dying that quickly, then it's not the tier 2 on Titania that's going to help you. The decreased damage received for 10 seconds and the buff to her damage is nice, but again, it's only for 10 seconds. Then you got to wait another 10 seconds, and then you still have to get hit. It will trigger when she's got focusing power active, so you can double down and not get hit but get hit in that sense. But Titania already hits very hard and consistently at tier 1 that she doesn't need to be tier 2 to see the most out of her kit. The last character I want to talk about today is Inferno, and while Inferno does deal a lot of damage, especially at tier 1, and it's surprising how much he does, survivability is really his issue. He doesn't last long enough, he dies very quickly. While he has 2 seconds of immunity and he has 3 seconds of 4 guard hits on his skills, it's again just very short in terms of times, 2 seconds and 3 seconds, and he can get pierced or he can get the guard hits knocked down very quickly, and then he can get punished. Unfortunately, his tier 2 passive doesn't do a lot for his survivability. Yes, it increases his buff duration by 30%, which will increase the effect, or the duration rather, of the immunity, of the guard hits, and of an obelisk if it has invincibility on it. It's really not the reason why you would tier 2 Inferno. To tier 2 Inferno, you'd basically just be looking at getting even more damage out of a character who already deals a lot of burst DPS, and you don't really need to do that unless you really like the character, or for some reason if you find yourself running out of time. But Inferno will usually run out of health long before he runs out of time, so if you can just kite better and manage your characters better by switching and things like that, you should be able to get similar results out of a tier 1 Inferno as a tier 2 Inferno, except that it'll take you a little bit longer and the damage numbers won't be as high, won't be as flashy. So that is my list for characters that you can safely keep at tier 1 but still build up to 6 stars and level 60 and give them obelisks and give them ISO sets, and they'll still be very, very serviceable to you. I know I've tier 2'd a couple of these characters, but most of the other ones I've left at tier 1 for this exact reason, and you can even give them Uru, and they will be extremely serviceable, and I usually use at least one of these in each of my weekly Shadowland clears, which shows their continued usability. So let me know what you guys think of my list. Let me know if I left any names off of it, or if some of my inclusions were skeptical. Subscribe if you like the content, if you're learning something new, and of course, if you like what you see, I hope to see you again tomorrow. Take care.